Something just dropped. An episode of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch that was pulled from the broadcast schedule before a single viewer had the opportunity to see it has surfaced online in the last several hours. Not a clip, not a segment, a complete episode. 47 minutes of investigation footage, field recordings, scientific data, and team responses to events that occurred during a single night on that property that the History Channel reviewed, assessed, and made the decision to remove from the public record before the season it was produced forever aired. The people who have seen it in the hours since it surfaced are not describing it in the language that the standard episode of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch produces in its audience. They are describing it in the language of people who have watched something that exceeded the framework they brought to it, more disturbing than any season the show has aired, more significant than any single piece of evidence the investigation has publicly documented, and more difficult to explain away than anything that has previously carried the Skinwalker Ranch name in the public conversation about what is happening on that property. Before we go any further, hit subscribe and turn your notifications on. The complete breakdown of what is on that episode starts right now. The episode that has surfaced was produced during what the people close to the production describe as the most active investigation period in the show's entire run. Not active in the sense that the cameras captured more events than usual. Active in the sense that the events the cameras were capturing were different in character from anything that the show's previous seasons had documented. The Skinwalker Ranch investigation team had spent multiple seasons building toward an understanding of the property that the systematic approach of Travis Taylor and Eric Bard's scientific methodology was designed to produce. Season by season, the instrumentation had been refined. The data collection had become more sophisticated. The team's understanding of where the phenomena concentrated and when they were most likely to occur had been sharpened by the accumulation of seasons of precise measurement. And by the production period during which the band episode was filmed, that understanding had reached a point where the team was no longer reacting to events. They were anticipating them. The specific investigation documented in the band episode was not a standard overnight lockdown at a previously investigated location on the property. It was the result of a decision by the scientific team to focus the full complement of the investigation's resources on a location and a time window that the accumulated data from previous seasons had identified as the highest probability point for significant activity. Every piece of equipment the team had access to was deployed. Every scientific discipline represented on the team was positioned at the locations the data said would be most productive. The investigation was not a fishing expedition. It was a targeted engagement with a phenomenon whose behavior the team had studied long enough to have a specific prediction about what would happen if they positioned themselves correctly on the right night. What happened when they did is what the episode documents. And what the episode documents is why the History Channel made the decision that no one outside the production was ever supposed to see it. The investigation documented in the band episode began at approximately 8:47 in the evening. That timestamp appears in the field recording metadata that has been reviewed by the people who have accessed the episode and whose consistency across multiple data sources confirms its accuracy. The conditions were standard for a Skinwalker Ranch overnight investigation. Clear sky, low wind, the specific stillness that the property produces on nights when the phenomena the investigation has been tracking are most active. Travis Taylor noted in his field log, which appears on camera in the episode, that the atmospheric readings at the investigation's start were the most anomalous baseline readings the instrumentation had recorded at the property across the entire run of the show. Not anomalous in the sense of interference or equipment malfunction. Anomalous in the sense that the specific combination of electromagnetic, infrasonic, and gravitational readings the instruments were producing at 8:47 in the evening were readings that the team's accumulated data associated with the onset of significant activity. The investigation had not yet formally begun, and the property was already doing something that the team's most sophisticated instruments had never previously captured at that intensity. Eric Bard's data station registered the first significant event at 9:12. A subsurface reading from the sensor array he had positioned across the mesa's eastern face showed a pulse whose character was unlike anything the instrumentation had previously recorded. Not a spike, not a drop, a wave. A sustained oscillation in the subsurface electromagnetic profile of the mesa that lasted 43 seconds, and that the instruments measured as propagating outward from a point approximately 60 feet below the surface at the mesa's center. The wave reached the surface instrumentation at a speed that Travis Taylor, reviewing the data in real time on camera, described as inconsistent with any known geological transmission mechanism. It moved faster than rock transmits electromagnetic energy, significantly faster, and when it reached the surface sensors, every instrument on the property registered a simultaneous anomalous reading that lasted for the duration of the wave's surface propagation and stopped the moment the wave's oscillation ended. 43 seconds of simultaneous anomalous readings across every instrument deployed across the entire 512 acres of the property. Taylor looked at the data and said quietly and without any theatrical inflection that in 20 years of working with instrumentation of this kind, he had never seen anything like what the data had just shown him. The cameras were rolling, the data was captured, and the night was just beginning. The thermal imaging array that the Skinwalker Ranch investigation deployed across the property during the banned episode investigation was the most comprehensive thermal surveillance the show had ever brought to a single overnight session. 6 cameras positioned at overlapping angles across the primary investigation area, each capable of detecting heat signatures at ranges and resolutions that the civilian paranormal investigation community had never previously had access to. The decision to deploy the full array had been made based on the subsurface data from previous seasons that indicated the location and the timing of the investigation as the highest probability point for the specific category of phenomena that thermal imaging was best positioned to document. That decision proved correct in ways that nobody on the team had fully anticipated. At 9:31, the thermal camera positioned at the mesa's northern face recorded a heat signature that the automated analysis system flagged as anomalous within seconds of its appearance. The signature was not consistent with any biological source. It was not consistent with any mechanical source. It was not consistent with any geological process whose thermal output the team's database of known thermal signatures contained a record of. It was approximately 2 meters in height. It was stationary, and it was radiating heat at a temperature that the instruments measured as significantly above ambient in a way that had no conventional explanation given the absence of any identifiable heat source at that location. Taylor and Bard reviewed the thermal data simultaneously on the monitor in the field command station. The exchange between them that the cameras captured lasted approximately 4 minutes. Neither of them spoke for the first 90 seconds of that 4 minutes. They looked at the data, they looked at each other, and then Taylor said something to Bard that the episode's audio captured clearly, and that every person who has reviewed the footage has cited as the moment they understood why the History Channel made the decision not to air what the cameras recorded that night. He said the signature is not consistent with anything we have in the database. He said the temperature profile does not match any known biological or mechanical source. And then he said something that the 20 years of government aerospace work and the multiple advanced degrees and the professional discipline that had made him the most credible scientific voice on the show had apparently been insufficient preparation for. He said, "I do not know what this is," and his voice, in saying it, did not carry the excitement that an anomalous reading in the context of a paranormal investigation show might be expected to produce in the scientist responsible for analyzing it. It carried something else, something that the people who have reviewed the episode have described consistently and without the language to fully name. The specific quality of a person who has found what they were looking for and who, in the finding of it, has understood something about what finding it means that the search itself had not prepared them for. Jay Wasley was not present for the investigation documented in the banned episode. The decision about who was in the field that night was made by the production team based on the specific requirements of the investigation the data had pointed toward, and the audio specialist role was filled by a crew member whose professional background in field recording gave them the technical capability the investigation required without the show's established cast dynamic that the episode's specific character made the production team decide against deploying in full. What that crew member's equipment captured during the investigation is the dimension of the banned episode that the people who have reviewed it have found most difficult to discuss. The audio recording array deployed for the investigation covered frequencies from the infrasonic range, well below the threshold of human hearing, through ultrasonic frequencies well above it. The decision to deploy full-spectrum audio coverage had been driven by the same data analysis that had positioned the investigation at the location and timing the banned episode documents. Previous seasons had suggested that the phenomena associated with the mesa were accompanied by audio signatures across frequency ranges that standard field recording equipment was not designed to capture. The full-spectrum array was the attempt to document those signatures at a resolution the previous season's equipment had not been capable of providing. What it captured during the investigation is distributed across 3 separate frequency bands, each of which contains material that the people reviewing the episode have described in terms that are specific and consistent, and that collectively constitute the most significant audio evidence the Skinwalker Ranch investigation has ever produced. The infrasonic band contains a sustained low-frequency signal that began at 9:47 and continued without interruption for the remainder of the investigation. The signal's specific frequency, measured precisely by the instrumentation, corresponds to a range that independent acoustic research has associated with physiological effects in human beings, including disorientation, anxiety, and the specific visual disturbances that the brain produces when its processing is disrupted by sustained low-frequency vibration. Every crew member present during the investigation reported these symptoms. The timing of their onset was consistent with the beginning of the infrasonic signal. The connection between the two was noted in Taylor's field log, and the specific frequency of the signal, which the instrumentation measured with precision, does not correspond to any known natural source of infrasonic sound in the geological and environmental context of the Uinta Basin. The investigation documented in the band episode lasted 7 hours and 14 minutes from the initial field deployment to the decision to withdraw from the location. Across those 7 hours and 14 minutes, the 6 members of the investigation team experienced a progressive series of events whose cumulative character shaped the decision to pull the episode from the broadcast schedule in ways that the specific events themselves, taken individually, might not have produced. It was not any single thing that happened that night that made the History Channel look at the episode and determine that it was not something they were prepared to put on television. It was the sequence, the way the events built on each other, the specific escalation from anomalous instrumentation readings to documented physiological effects in the team members to the final event of the investigation, whose character is the dimension of the band episode that the people who have reviewed it have been most reluctant to describe in full. The physiological effects began at approximately 10:15, 1 hour and 28 minutes into the investigation. The crew member responsible for monitoring the thermal array reported a sudden and intense headache whose specific character she described in her field notes as unlike any headache she had previously experienced. Not a pressure headache, not a tension headache, a headache that appeared to originate from a specific point behind her left eye, and that was accompanied by a visual disturbance in her left field of vision that she described as a moving darkness, rather than the static visual artifacts that standard migraine aura produces. Within 11 minutes of her report, 2 other crew members had reported similar symptoms. The specific combination of headache and left field visual disturbance was consistent across all 3 reports. The left field specificity is the detail that Travis Taylor flagged in his field log as significant. In the context of the infrasonic signal, whose frequency the instrumentation had been measuring since 947, the left field visual disturbance pattern was consistent with documented physiological responses to sustained infrasonic exposure at the specific frequency the instruments were reading. At 11:59 in the evening, 2 hours and 47 minutes before the investigation concluded, something happened on the Skinwalker Ranch property that every account of the band episode returns to as the specific moment that determined the History Channel's decision. The full complement of thermal cameras registered simultaneously. Not one camera, not the cameras positioned at the highest probability locations. Every camera in the array, all 6, registered the same signature at the same moment. Not 6 different signatures from 6 different locations. The same signature appearing simultaneously on 6 cameras positioned at different points across the investigation area, as though the same source was visible from every angle simultaneously. The signature lasted 11 seconds. During those 11 seconds, the infrasonic signal, whose continuous presence the audio array had been recording since 947, increased in intensity by a factor that the instrumentation's calibration had not been designed to handle. The audio equipment flagged an overflow error at the 11-second mark. The overflow lasted for the same 11 seconds as the thermal signature, and resolved the moment the thermal signature disappeared. What the thermal cameras recorded during those 11 seconds, from 6 different positions across the investigation area, is the footage whose character the History Channel reviewed and whose presence in an episode of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch they determined was not something they were in a position to broadcast. The production company has never publicly addressed the episode's existence. The network has never publicly addressed the decision to pull it, and the 11 seconds of footage from 6 simultaneous thermal cameras that drove that decision are now part of the surfaced episode that has been circulating since this morning. The data that the investigation's instrumentation produced during the band episode investigation represents, according to the people who have reviewed it with the technical background to assess its significance, the most comprehensive and the most anomalous dataset that the Skinwalker Ranch investigation has ever collected in a single overnight session. The electromagnetic data, the infrasonic data, the thermal imaging data, the gravitational reading anomalies that the instrumentation recorded at multiple points during the investigation, the subsurface sensor data whose 43-second wave at at the investigation's beginning was the first indicator of what the night would produce. Taken together, across the 7 hours and 14 minutes of the investigation, the data set that Travis Taylor and Eric Bard assembled constitutes a scientific record of a single night at Skinwalker Ranch that the show's most significant previous episodes had not approached in either scope or specificity. That data set is included in the surfaced episode, not summarized, not presented through the standard episode format of Taylor and Bard reviewing selected highlights on monitors while the cameras document their reactions. Included, the raw data, the instrument readings at every measurement point across the investigation's duration, the field logs, the crew reports, the full audio recording across all frequency bands for the complete 7 hours and 14 minutes of the investigation. The people reviewing the surfaced episode who have the technical background to assess what the data shows are describing it in terms that the standard vocabulary of paranormal investigation evidence is not equipped to carry. What the data shows happened at Skinwalker Ranch during the night documented in the banned episode is not ambiguous. It is not open to the interpretation that most paranormal investigation evidence requires the viewer to supply. It is precise. It is measured. It is documented by instrumentation whose calibration and methodology Travis Taylor spent years establishing as credible. And it shows something that the History Channel looked at and decided the world was not ready to see on a Tuesday night. The decision to pull the episode from the broadcast schedule was not made by a single person and was not made quickly. The people close to the production who have been willing to discuss it describe a review process that involved the production company, the network, and at least one external consultation whose specific character they have declined to elaborate on, beyond saying that the consultation was not with anyone whose professional identity was associated with paranormal research or entertainment production. The review process took 11 days. At the end of those 11 days, the decision was unanimous. The episode would not air. The footage would be archived under restricted access. The scientific data would be secured, and the production team would be asked to sign supplemental non-disclosure agreements whose scope went significantly beyond the standard contracts they had signed at the beginning of the season. The reason the episode was banned is not the reason that the cynical reading of any paranormal television production would suggest. It was not banned because the evidence was too ambiguous to support the show's narrative. It was banned because the evidence was not ambiguous at all. What the investigation documented that night, the 43-second subsurface wave, the simultaneous 6-camera thermal signature, the infrasonic signal and its documented physiological effects on the team, the 11 seconds of footage that the production review described in terms that the people discussing this have chosen not to repeat publicly, constitutes a scientific record of events at Skinwalker Ranch that the people who reviewed it were not prepared to release into the public conversation without a framework for what the release would produce. That framework does not yet exist. The episode existed in a restricted archive for years, while the conversation about whether and how to release it continued among the people with the authority to make that decision. The conversation produced no resolution, and the archive was not as secure as the people who relied on its security believed it to be. The surfaced episode is circulating. The people who have reviewed it are talking about it in terms whose consistency across different viewers with different technical backgrounds and different levels of familiarity with the Skinwalker Ranch investigation suggests that what they are describing is genuinely present in the footage rather than a function of expectation or suggestion. The History Channel has not issued a statement. The production company has not issued a statement. Brandon Fugel has not commented. Travis Taylor has not commented. Eric Bard has not commented. The coordinated silence of every person with official connection to the investigation in the hours since the episode surfaced is itself a communication whose meaning the people following this story are not struggling to interpret. The banned episode exists. The data it contains is real. The footage it contains is real, and the 11 seconds of simultaneous 6-camera thermal imaging that drove the decision to pull it from the broadcast schedule 11 days after the investigation concluded are now visible to anyone who finds the circulating file and has the background to understand what they are looking at. The Skinwalker Ranch investigation has been building toward something since its first season. The banned episode documents the night the investigation reached it, and the question that has organized everything the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch has ever done, the question of what is happening on that property and why, has, in the footage now circulating, received an answer whose implications the people who reviewed it 11 days after the investigation could not manage, and that the broader public is now in a position to encounter directly. What they make of it is the next chapter of the Skinwalker Ranch story, and it is a chapter that the History Channel's decision to pull the episode was designed to prevent from being written. Subscribe now and turn your notifications on. This story is not finished.